Hi everyone and welcome to my review of The Living Daylights, the 15th James Bond film in the franchise, and it's once again directed by Glen. And it's an interesting one. It comes, right off of A View to a Kill, which for me was one of the worst Bonds. And it's the first Bond with Timothy Dalton. He would do two Bonds, of course, this and Licence to Kill. And it's the final Bond film that's composed by John Barry, so it's an interesting film. And as well, you've got between this and Licence to Kill, you've got this kind of divide, quite a big divide about which is the better Bond film. You've got a lot of people say Licence to Kill, one of the best, but then they also say Living Daylights is one of the worst, or the other way around. You don't really get much lists or rankings where they're both at the top or both quite low down. You occasionally, but they're divisive. The two films are divisive, and I'm certainly one of the supporters of Licence to Kill, certainly over this one. And while I don't think it's right down the bottom, I'm not a big fan of this film, The Living Daylights, for a number of reasons. But the opening scene, it's a great opening scene. It's full of great action, suspense. The way Timothy Dalton is revealed, the camera just sort of slowly zooms when you've got one of these guys falling down this cliff, was perfect, really, perfect intro. And it just it's perfectly timed there, without any dialogue, just to reveal who is actually Bond. And yeah, I just thought it was a great opening scene. And you've got some really good scenes early on. For example, where the Bond girl is introduced, played by Maryam. I thought she was quite a good Bond girl in this film. Not great, but yeah. But the way she was introduced, and the way it makes her involved in the plot more than a lot of Bond girls. She's not just one of these characters. It's just Bond girls who's just along for the sake of it, and a lifeless character that doesn't have any involvement in the plot. No, she is involved, and she has motivations. And I thought the chemistry between her and Dalton early on in the film was really good, and it worked. And just the film had loads of elements that made up for a really good Bond. The suspense, the romance, and the tone was really good. It had some comedy in it, but it didn't make it unbelievable. It wasn't campy really for me, apart from one side character. Who I'm on about. But yeah, the second half of the film, I think, changes tone completely, and becomes more campy, and as well it becomes more of a generic action film, I feel. And the film takes place in many locations. It's more of a globetrotting Bond. Vienna, Morocco, and eventually Afghanistan. Where the plot takes him to kind of meet with this arms dealer, Brad Whitaker, and he's played by Joe Don Baker. And I didn't feel he was that good in this film either. It just didn't work. It was an over-the-top performance. But yeah, it takes him to Afghanistan, and most of the generic action scenes, just forgettable sequences go on there. And for what is actually involved, it should be, a really adrenaline fueled set of sequences, towards the end. But they don't really feel like that. And Dalton kind of sticks out because he's still playing this really serious, Bond, but the film, it kind of changes tone drastically, I feel, and it just doesn't work. And there's nothing worse really than a film that has an inconsistent tone, because you can have some great parts, but when they're all put together and they don't quite work, that's when the film can really fall apart. And some of the side characters as well in the second half are just bland, I feel, and it just doesn't quite work for me. I think the scenes in the snow at the beginning, the beginning half, were a lot stronger. And yeah, it just kind of set up a film that turned out to be completely different. You know, the plot is kind of generic again, but it's just mainly the tone of this film that really brings it down. The score, however, is really good throughout. I feel, and it's well directed. I feel, and pretty well shot. But you know, some of the action scenes, as I say, in the second half, could have been edited better. I feel, to make them more dynamic. And yeah, it just it doesn't have much of a pace either in the second half. There's kind of a lot of prolonged action scenes that are not mixed in with any real interesting character moments. And Dalton just feels out of his league here. It doesn't seem like he's meant to be in this film. I feel like they started off to go in a new direction. You know, they started off maybe to follow on from For Your Eyes Only, with that serious tone, and focusing more on that romance as well. But then it seems like they just went back to a lot of the more Bonds, with the campiness and the humour and everything. And yeah, it just doesn't work. And actually, overall, it turns into a film that's worse than, say, Octopussy for me. Just because Octopussy did have a consistency to it. And it was, you know, as I say, Octopussy, I really like the action scenes in that, for the most part. And in this, they fall short somehow. And apart from the ones early on, the action scenes just, yeah, they just feel generic. And it feels, the film just turns into this kind of tiresome, lifeless action flick. And it's a shame. It's a shame because Dalton he started off really amazing actually in this film. And really, yeah, he may have kept trying and delivering, but because it didn't fit that tone, and no one else was really, you know, taking it seriously, I felt it just didn't work. And you know, Jeroen Baker, there's a scene right towards the end. It's a really stupid scene where he's kind of having a standoff with Bond in this room, and it seems like a scene from A View to a Kill or something. It just doesn't work, I feel. And yeah, the fact that Dalton is still kind of like given a good performance, he's taking it seriously, everyone else isn't, comes across as weird. And I think that's worse than, you know, if, say you have a film like Octopussy, which is consistently, you know, campy, kind of it's there as a more humorous Bond, more light Bond. I feel that works better because it's more consistent for me. Yeah, you've got some more lows of Octopussy, but overall I think this is better. Octopussy is a better film, and you know, it has better action and stuff as well. But the music, the theme, is performed by Aha, and I didn't like the theme either. But the score manages to be, throughout the film, it moves the film along somewhat, and it is quite nice. And it's of course John Barry's last score for a Bond film, and yeah, it's better than the ones before this. I would say the scores, they weren't very good at all. But yeah, it seems to be a decent score, with not a very good title theme, but yeah, I can praise that, and I can praise some of the directing and the shots. And of course, the first 45 minutes or so, if it had stuck to that, I think it would have been one of the better Bonds. I would say not one of the best, but definitely not as low as I think it is now as a final product. And really, I think this is just a mediocre film. And without spoiling too much, I think License to Kill was Dalton's real break, and that was the one that allowed him to match his performance with the actual tone of the film, and or everyone else's performances. I really think that's the much better Bond that he was in, and at least he got he got to show himself really in that one. But for me, this film is a 57%, which isn't really a high score. And yeah, I'm definitely with support of License to Kill being the better of the Dalton Bonds, and that'll be reviewed next. But yeah, so overall, just it's not a consistent Bond for me. While Dalton starts off great and his performance works in the film, I think that the way the film pans out, it didn't really matter that he was still given something. The rest of the film didn't match that, and supporting characters not too good after that as well. You've got generic campy plot, humour that doesn't really work, and just generic action scenes that is just, they become tiresome, I feel. And yeah, it's a shame, but yeah, it's not a bad Bond. It's just it's pretty mediocre.